The modern Democratic Republic of the Congo is essentially everything you think of when you imagine extreme poverty. The average life expectancy here is one of the lowest in the world, at a depressing 59.8 years old. 43% of children under 5 are chronically malnourished. Child soldiers are taught to rape women from as young as 12. However, this depressing story has roots much deeper than just the squalor on the surface, and far more upsetting than can possibly be presented with a simple set of statistics. Leopold II was born in 1835 to the reigning Belgian monarch, Leopold I. At 18, he married Marie Henriette of Austria. Although they had 4 children, their only male heir to the throne died from pneumonia at age 12. Leopold grew to resent Marie Henriette, who produced no surviving male heir. He began paying nearly $1,000 a month, over $25,000 in today's money, for a supply of guaranteed virgins, some of whom were 10 to 15 years old. The couple separated after 16 years of unhappy marriage. While his life at home suffered, Leopold developed an obsession with overseas colonies, which he saw as the only way to increase puny Belgium's strength. By 1865, Leopold II became the King of Belgium and was able to plan out his darkest colonial fantasies with unprecedented power. Throughout his life, Leopold attempted overseas ventures in Egypt, Fiji, Brazil, Formosa, Argentina, Martin Garcia, and lastly, China, but had little success until he set his sights on Africa, specifically the Congo. He hired the famous explorer Henry Morton Stanley to map out the Congo and coerce the natives to sign treaties which granted King Leopold the entirety of their land. Although the treaties were written in a language the Congolese could not possibly understand, often all it took was a night of drinking or a well-placed electric shock to convince them to give up everything. Within 5 years, Stanley had prepared the Congo for Leopold's regime to roll in. The final step was the Berlin Conference, in which African land was carved up among European powers. Europeans had long had their eyes on Africa's rich natural resources, and the conference allowed them to officially, legally seize their plunder. Because Leopold was so skilled at putting on a humanitarian front, by the end of the conference, 14 European countries and the United States recognized the Congo Free State, an area over 76 times the size of Belgium, as his own private colony, separate from the control or jurisdiction of the Belgian government, and belonging solely to Leopold. The systems of oppression used by Leopold are almost unimaginable today. His men enslaved nearly the entire male population of the Congo and divided them into 2 main groups, producers and soldiers. The producers were primarily responsible for gathering goods such as rubber and ivory, which would be used to increase the wealth of Belgians, especially King Leopold, back home in Europe. Customarily, an African village or tribe would be assigned European supervisors who could impose insane production quotas on the local population. These quotas were often nearly impossible to fulfill, but the supervisors had means of coercion that left the natives little choice. Often, they would take all the wives in a village and encage them, raping them at will. The women were held as leverage for the deliverance of the next quota. In one case, the members of a Congolese rubber company killed and allegedly ate a man's wife and 5-year-old daughter as punishment for failure to meet his daily rubber quota. He is seen here looking at his daughter's severed hand and foot, delivered to him by his European supervisors. All of this forced labor was possible because of Leopold's own private militia, the Force Publique. While this was nominally a volunteer army, its thousands of soldiers were usually transported in chains. Much of the need for military force was fed by children's colonies, which kidnapped young boys and girls and trained them as soldiers until they could fight in the Force Publique themselves. While no death estimates can be certain, as there was no census in the Congo Free State, historians tend to agree on a population decrease of approximately 10 million, or loss of around half the Congolese population. One survivor of the regime later said of his supervisor, "All the blacks saw this man as the devil of the equator. From all the bodies killed in the field, you had to cut off the hands. He wanted to see the number of hands cut off by each soldier, who had to bring them in baskets. A village which refused to provide rubber would be swept completely clean. Rubber caused these torments. That's why we no longer want to hear its name spoken. Soldiers made young men kill or rape their own mothers and sisters." It is hard for us to understand today how people remained complacent with the inhumane systems of control. Perhaps many were willing to suspend their compassion in order to remain in their positions of power. Whatever the case, the first truly outspoken critic of the Congo came in the form of George Washington Williams in 1890. After witnessing horrific treatment of the natives in the ivory trade, the American missionary wrote an indignant open letter to King Leopold, detailing everything from the unrelenting rape of native women to the live burial of native slaves.
Williams's accusations appeared in newspapers all over Britain and the United States. So it was not unknown or buried. The problem is he was a very sick man and he died almost immediately thereafter, and there was no one around to pick anything up.
The incident which would ultimately spark the stand against Leopold did not take place in the Congo, but the Belgian port town of Antwerp, nearly 10 years after Williams wrote his scathing letter. There, a man named Edmund Dean Morel was employed by the Liverpool shipping firm Elder Dempster. Morel made a shocking discovery while keeping trade records of the Congo. Plenty of ivory and rubber was returning from the colony, but next to nothing was being exported to pay for it. Instead, the steamships left port loaded with guns and ammunition, goods which certainly were not used for the civilization of native peoples that Leopold had claimed. Morel's epiphany led him to a decade-long attack on Leopold. After publishing exposé articles in The Speaker, and later starting his own Congo-based newspaper, the West African Mail, Morel had laid the framework to take a stand against Leopold on a far larger scale. By 1903, Morel had influenced British Parliament to launch an investigation against Leopold. They sent Roger Casement, a veteran of Africa, to spend a year in the Congo, compiling an official report exposing Leopold's brutal treatment of the natives.
What really changed everything was Morel's ability, with some other people, to get the British Parliament to take a stand. And because they did, the Foreign Secretary turned to Casement and said, all right, drop everything, take that trip you've been badgering us about, go inland, and tell us what's going on.
He emerged in 1904 with the Casement Report, one of the most damning documents to ever be written against Leopold. After returning to Europe, Roger Casement finally met Edmond Dean Morel, and they became close friends. Upon a visit to Morel's house, Casement suggested that they found an international organization for the protection of the Congo. Morel was weary, but his wife was so fond of the idea she convinced him to follow through. Thus, the Congo Reform Association was born. The organization was wildly successful, spreading internationally to include prestige members such as Joseph Conrad, Herbert Ward, Anatole France, Arthur Conan Doyle, and Mark Twain. The movement against Leopold was not without opposition, however. The king lobbied Congress heavily in support of his cause and had an entire propaganda machine dedicated to dispelling the lies of reformists such as Casement, Williams, and Morel. Despite these efforts, Leopold was on a downward spiral, and publicly courting a 16-year-old prostitute, Caroline Lacroix, at the age of 65, only diminished what little popularity he had left.
The paradoxical thing, of course, is here is a guy who should have been despised for causing this enormous number of deaths in Africa, but in fact his popularity at home, his lack of popularity, was really much more due to the fact that he was a womanizer, was not on speaking terms with two of his three daughters, had this affair with Caroline that was very public and long-lasting. These were why Belgians didn't like him.
Leopold finally made a last-ditch effort to form a commission to investigate the Congo Free State, write a positive report, and ultimately clear his name. Although the three members of the assembled commission were from 3 different countries, shared no common language, and could hardly talk to the natives, the plan still backfired. The conditions were so poor that even a fake commission could not be fooled, and they wrote yet another damning report against the Congo Free State, this time sponsored by Leopold himself. By 1908, in the face of insurmountable outside pressure and international shame, King Leopold II sold his private colony to the Belgian government, ending over 20 years of unchecked, despotic, plundering rule. At the Congo Reform Association's last meeting, Morel announced, "We have struck a blow for human justice that cannot and will not pass away." Today, the Congo Free State is known as the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It has a population of nearly 70 million, but these millions live in immense poverty. The GDP per capita stands at around $500 US. America's GDP per capita, over 100 times that, at over $50,000. Nothing can more clearly illustrate the poverty that these people live in than the testimonies of an everyday Congolese citizen.
Jinangu Sifa Therese nitokea Mange. Ninakaa na batoto 3 benye bwanangu aliniachia wakati alifariki. Juu ya kukosa ginsi baishi, njo bananza fanya usharati. Bamingi banapatikana mai kambi na samoya kuko sa tunabakamataka, tunaanza wasambisha na bale babwana benye balibabaka mu busiku.
War has engulfed the country in recent years, claiming millions of civilian lives. Children are routinely kidnapped to become soldiers, in horrifying echoes of Leopold-era force publique-sponsored children's colonies. All of these depressing factors can be traced back to the rule of Leopold, from the rampant mass exploitation, to the child soldiers, to the incessant rape, to the uncontrollable poverty.
A country always reflects the history it has lived through. Colonialism in Africa was basically an organized system of plunder. And when the only way in which people have experienced government is as something that is organizing the plunder of their country, it's very hard when colonialism comes to an end and a country ostensibly becomes independent for, a really deeper democracy to replace that.
King Leopold's rule has left a scar on the Congo that has never healed. And while the fight against him was undoubtedly important, it serves as a grim reminder that we can only do so much right to scratch out decades of wrong.